Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of ClueCon Weekly. I'm your host, Jon Gray, and today we're going to be talking about going from open source repos to enterprise products and how internal product goals can sometimes lead into the external community cycles and how it is that we go about development. So to dive into this further, I'm joined by Micah Timileyin. He's a technical program manager and agile strategist over at Interswitch Group. So Micah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi,
And
John. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Awesome. Well, Micah, I believe this is your first time on the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do over at Interswitch Group?
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, it's my first time on the podcast, and at my core, on a day-to-day basis, I live right at the intersection of engineering and program delivery, right, project delivery. And right now, I'm a technical program manager at Interswitch, and I work on Agile delivery. If you look at my previous experiences, my job is basically taking complex, heavy lifting technical projects, whether it is working on Kubernetes platforms, platform architectures, or integrating high machine learning systems, and figuring out how to deliver them smoothly without breaking things. The guy that's related engineers and business leaders to just looking at messy, brilliant chaos of engineering work and following and sometimes building the roadmap so teams can ship systems without burning out. Yeah, that
Yeah,
works.
I like what you said without breaking things because, yeah, that's obviously what we end up doing and how, 1,000 things have to go right in order to even make a phone call
Right.
go through. So especially dealing with FreeSwitch, building a demo is pretty easy, but kind of getting that out of the demo phase and into production sometimes really is not, like in theory, you hear the name free and you see docs and you see examples, you see the big community. Why is it kind of not as easy as maybe that would seem? And why is it that like building for production kind of has all of these quirks that we kind of need to take into consideration?
Okay. Thank you. Brilliant question, actually. I think it's a challenge that a lot of us face. So
Mm-hmm.
think about it like this. Building a demo is like building a car out of Legos. You know, Legos game in your
Mm-hmm.
living room, right? It looks great, the wheels turn, and you just show it off to your friends. But think about production, like production is taking that Legos car and putting it on a highway at 80 miles an hour in the middle of a torrential downpour.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a demo usually only has to work once under perfect conditions for a 5-minute presentation, right? But production is about day two operations beyond showing the shiny new product out to everyone after the applause. Production is when 1,000 or 1,000,000 requests hits the product, right? It's about what happens at 3 a.m. when a server drops or when security protocols flag a vulnerability or when traffic spikes by 10x. Open source usually gives you the raw engine, but you have to build the seat belts, you have to build the airbags, you have to build the dashboard to monitor, the product. That's what I would say is the difference between demo and production, and what I
Mm-hmm.
think we should take note. So I would say demo should be tested for production. Test it against real production traffic, right?
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And kind of all the points you brought up are essentially why SignalWire exists, because of all the hurdles and struggles that come with kind of free switch, open source communities, and kind of making sure that everything kind of stays in line. One big thing, as you mentioned, if a server goes down at 3 in the morning, what is it that you do? And have a lot of that is what's really tough. Another thing that you were mentioning is kind of fork drift, or maybe how what your product is kind of directioning, or where it is that you're heading is maybe a little bit different than what is kind of being pushed in the community. Can you kind of talk about like the problem with fork drift and kind of how it is that you're able to align your internal product with what is happening kind of out in the community?
So, one of the ways that we
But I was just curious. You mentioned we treat upstreaming not as an act of charity, but as a critical dependency management strategy. And you're kind of saying that when you push your own, code to the community, and you're kind of helping boost that up, It's not so much that you're doing it just out of charity, out of wanting to do it, but kind of as a critical dependency management strategy. Can you elaborate on what you mean by the management strategy of why it is that you kind of push to the community?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this topic because it sounds counterintuitive to business people. When you tell a
Mm-hmm.
corporate executive, hey, you say our engineers just fixed a major bug and we're going to give that code away to the public for free, they look at you like you're crazy, right? But
Yeah.
upstreaming isn't charity, it's a deeply selfish and aggressive engineering strategy when you think about it really. Think about it, if we fix a bug in our system but keep it secret, guess who has to test, patch, and maintain that fix every single
Mm-hmm.
time the open source software updates, right? We have to still do that, right? But by releasing it to the public, we give access to a lot of engineers around the world to test it for us. We just bought ourselves a lifetime subscription to technical debt, right?
Yeah.
But if we give that fix back to the public repository, the community accepts it into the main blueprint. Now, thousands of other developers around the world are testing and maintaining our fix for us, right? So we just pretty much crowdsourced our maintenance costs. Do you understand it? So this is
Oh,
how I would
definitely.
speak to an executive, because executives, especially business executives, they're usually thinking about costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some things we have to reap the rewards in hindsight, not on the immediate.
Yeah. Can you talk
So
about
it's
technical debt? Kind of like what that term means, or maybe like when you found yourself just in a slippery slope of like, oh my gosh, I'm deep in it right now.
technical debts can be avoided, can be avoided to a large extent, honestly. So
Mm-hmm.
technical debt is pretty much a very easy way to explain it is having outstanding things to do, outstanding engineering work to do. So you have a need to engineer a solution, or you have a need to fix a bug. And sometimes for an open source software, what you need to do is to um, crowdsource it, right? When you think about a popular AI tool like Claude, at some
Mm-hmm.
point they have had to, make some hackathons open to the public, give engineers from across the world access to the platform, contribute to it just to make it better. So for open source platforms, that's a good way to go.
Yeah, and what you were kind of talking about kind of makes me think about how difficult it is sometimes to find good free switch developers. Like it's kind of few and far between, and it's not the thing that everyone is kind of going to college for. So a lot of times what we need to do at SignalWire is kind of creating a control plane, a way where like even internal teams can communicate, talk to each other, and that way we kind of give the power of free switch, the power of any open source community into the hands of kind of everybody, and kind of making that a little bit at a lower level that everyone can kind of understand, and empowering everybody in that regard. So how is it that you kind of are creating products to give like the technical greatness of these open source projects, but in like a more usable way for everybody to kind of see and appreciate? For example, if there's an edge case where a Sophia SIP server goes down and you only have one person who knows how to kind of debug that, you're in for trouble when 3 a.m. comes around. So do you ever find yourself kind of creating like a control plane or kind of meeting people halfway in order to give the power of open source into the hands of everybody?
Yes, 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 yes. That's a very good question, because we live in an era where there's a lot of competition and you need to make your tools and services easily accessible for users, right? Because if customers, if users face difficulties or hiccups in your product, it will be very easy for them to jump ship to your competitor. So I understand free
Mm-hmm.
switch is an absolute beast, very good too. Yeah, very powerful, but if you look at it wrong, it can look like you're learning to fly a commercial airliner by twisting the bare wires together. So imagine you're trying to
Oh my
fly
God,
an
yeah.
airplane, but you're trying to just connect the cables. So the secret to designing a good control plane, right, or platform layer isn't about hiding the power. It's about smart abstraction, right? So think of your iPhone, for example. Underneath that sleek glass screen is a mind-boggling complex operating system, right? But you don't really need to write the terminal command to make a phone call, right? I mean, every time you want to make a call, you don't write a terminal command, but as an engineer, you know that each time I tap in someone's number and I click on the green box, script is running underneath, right? Yeah, so to an ordinary user, with all due respect, it doesn't look like that, but to an engineer, you definitely have an idea. So when we build internal tools or enterprise wrappers around open source tech, right? Our job is really to ensure that we have automated the infrastructure nightmare, make it easy, right, for end users, so our teams can focus on creativity. So we have people that focus on infrastructure end to end. Then we ensure that we have people that, you know, can focus on, doing their creative work. So people should not need a PhD in telecom protocols to be able to route a call or to launch a feature. Right. I hope that answers your question.
No, definitely. And I love that line of thinking, because that's ultimately what we hear so often at SignalWire. People, kind of moving either away from FreeSwitch to SignalWire, or, to incorporate some of these open source communities in order to not have to reinvent the wheel, is kind of what we're saying. And as you said, rewire the wires on the airplane, letting people focus on creativity, innovation, ingenuity, like, and as you mentioned greatly, you don't need a PhD candidate to learn all the telecom underlayers, in order to just transfer a call. Like, let them, empower and disrupt whatever industry it is that they're in, by leveraging some of these things, standing on the shoulders of giants, ultimately. But that leads me, if you just have any cool, I shouldn't say cool, but war stories about either falling into technical debt, or, maybe finding that fork drift has happened too far, or even just maintaining some open source projects that, you're stuck and you don't know where to go for. So there's some crazy stories that you've encountered, Micah.
So because of the sensitivity of the industry, I may not be able to share as much detail, but in my line of work, right, especially dealing with high volume fintech and operations, the best success stories are the ones that are completely boring, right? Where something fails at night and there's a risk of losing money, losing customers' money, and you have to be on a call into the midnight to early morning, trying to resolve an issue or trying to trace a bug with engineers, right? So I've been involved in, critical calls like that, right? Massive backend integrations, work that never gets seen on the outside, right? But needs to happen, right? Good user experience, all right? So I've worked on things like deploying machine learning and anomaly detection models, to monitor live transaction streams with over 93% accuracy. The one in those scenarios is always the invincible plumbing, right? You're trying to swap out, the engine of a plane while it's flying at 30,000 feet with 10 million passengers on board.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's not easy. It's never easy to do. It's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of engaging with different stakeholders, explaining, bringing information to different kinds of people. Some people you need to speak technical language, some people you need to speak business language, some people you need to speak an hybrid, right? Just different kind of thing. So when you successfully migrate, millions of data points or live streams over to a new architecture, and the users don't feel a single stutter or drop or glitch, right? So that's the victory. That's a success story, right? So in infrastructure, usually silence is the highest praise, where users can keep using the product, they can keep using their service without ever noticing that you were doing something underneath. Ever noticing, so carrying out a major infrastructure upgrade. That's the real success story.
Oh yeah, it definitely, and it's so much easier said than done from scaling, especially in
Oh
telecom,
yeah,
where I shouldn't say what, of 1 second can totally change someone's experience with the call, and you're having to connect people from all different parts
oh
of the
yes, oh
globe,
yes,
connecting in the same call, and they're all scaling up and down. There are just so many considerations,
absolutely.
and especially when so many emergency lines are based off of the VoIP infrastructures that we built, that you have to make sure that these are very reliable. And as you mentioned, when you're flying a plane up in the sky and you're trying to rechange the engine, because that's definitely how it feels sometimes. Well, Micah, what have I yet to ask you? I know we've bounced around through quite a few different topics. Is there anything you have to plug, or anything I've yet to ask you about?
So I think
Hmm.
if someone is sitting in one box, right, where do they start from? Right, I
Yeah.
would say that don't just buy more boxes, right? You scale in less infrastructure, you know, you just get a bigger expensiveness, right? So I would say that don't just buy more boxes, right? Because if you scale architecture, you just get a bigger expensiveness. So I would say start with these 3 steps. One, separate states, right? If your single box is holding user logins, images, and database all in one place, fix that first. Move the database to its own, move it separately. App servers should be completely stateless, meaning you should run out of the wall and throw it in the trash, right? Then secondly, get glasses, of course. Don't scale until you have visibility, observability into what's happening on it, so our users interacting. If you don't have these running out, or while you're maxing out on the CPU storage or something, scaling to 5 boxes just means you are now blind in 5 different places. You see, so you went first. So start routing in traffic smartly now, even before you think of your units. So load balancer, it should just help you maximize resources. Sometimes you're minimizing the resource that you currently have. So you want to try to do that first. So yeah, I hope I answered that question. But
Yeah, definitely.
just one more thing to
Yeah.
share. One more
Uh-huh.
thing to share. If it is the human culture that it takes to do this kind of work, right? Everyone usually focuses on the technology, the Kubernetes, the APIs, the control planes. But moving an enterprise source project to an enterprise product is actually a psychological shift for the team. And sometimes the people part is what missing in teams. And I found that if you have, you always have the highest chance of success. If you can get your team members on the same page, you always have the highest chance of success. So we have to shift the engineers from an inventor mindset to a maintainer mindset, a scaling mindset, right? It means moving away from looking at this. Sometimes engineers just want to. I still had this conversation with one of my engineers this morning, that sometimes engineers just want to do cool, shiny features, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh
That they
yeah,
just built,
guilty.
right? Yeah. So I went and I was trying to tell these engineers that I want you to start looking for view. How does everything connect to each other? The system, right? Look at. I want to move them to thinking about incredibly clean documentation, a thorough test suite, and predictable release cycle. So we can always predict that we're going to deliver this. So the code is half the battle, but the culture usually is what keeps uh, is what ensures that the team continues to deliver. All right.
Th-
So
Yeah.
that's my
No,
final comment.
yeah, I like that answer, because all too often we think on the technical capabilities of what do we need in order to make this occur. But if you don't have the right company culture to back it up, and the team on your side all swimming in the same direction, you're doomed for failure. So I like that. Moving from a development created into a maintaining and scaling up kind of mindset. Well, Micah, that's all of the questions that I had. Thank you so much for joining us today, and for teaching us how to better build our systems.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, John.